Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about something that I really didn't think we'd be talking about, Brian, especially the way the corn price has been the last couple of years. We're going to talk about continuous soybean production. There are actually quite a few guys across the country that are thinking about growing soybeans on this year's soybean ground again.
Well, whether you want to raise soybeans or corn or wheat or any other crop, you really need to focus on your overall fertility program. But one of the things that often gets neglected is micronutrients. We'll talk about how important they are and what you can do on your farm to make sure you're not short on micronutrients today.
We have a very common weed of the week that you may not know the identity of this week's weed, but we'll show you how to get it under control. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
Just the other day I was talking to a non-farmer, and this non-farmer just asked me, how come when you're driving around the countryside you see great big piles of grain in some places, and then I also see farmers or elevators putting grain into bins? Why do they have the piles?
Well, that's a pretty easy answer, Brian, because they don't have enough bin space. You know, if you had bin space and you could put all your grain safely inside, in our country, that would be the practice.
And that's exactly what I said to this non-farmer. But then the follow-up question was, well, if they put them outside in these big piles, don't they spoil?
First of all, when are we doing this? When are we piling grain outside? We're piling it outside when it's cold.
Hopefully.
And, you know, when we're thinking about fall, if it's very early in the fall, we could still have some warm weather. But chances are, this late into the fall, we're going to get cool temperatures and cool nights, and we can put grain outside and we aren't going to have all that heat. If you get two things, you're going to have spoilage. You can have heat and you can have moisture. And if you can pile the grain when it's cool, that's one of the big things that you can avoid. Then the other thing is how you pile that grain. If you have one peak and you get some rain, now the water can run off. If you have multiple peaks, that's where you get pockets where water is going to settle and penetrate down into that pile. That's where you would tend to see more spoilage.
And obviously, if you have lots of days where you have some moisture, that's a bad thing, as opposed to one big rain and then you have lots of sun after that. And no matter how you do it, you're going to have some spoilage when piling the grain outside. And so what every farmer weighs out and what every grain elevator weighs out is, how much am I losing to spoilage? How much does that cost me versus how much does it cost to put up another bin, and how often would I actually use that bin? So I think about our own farm, for example, and for our dad, he never ever wanted to pile any grain, which is great. We didn't have any real major spoilage risks or anything like that as long as we had the grain to the right moisture when it went into the bin. But because of that, we would always overbuild for bins. So we always had extra bin space, it seemed like. No, I shouldn't say always. 9 years out of 10, we would have extra bin space. And so that's kind of the thing. Do you want to weigh out that cost of, well, I might have an empty bin there, or am I going to risk losing it putting extra grain into a pile?
Okay, well, there's another reason that farmers may pile their grain outside. Let's say that the grain elevator that they're hauling to, they're big long lines with lots of guys dumping grain, and they don't want to drive their truck into that elevator, wait in line for a few hours before they can dump one truck and then take it back out to the field to fill it up again. So sometimes farmers will say, you know what, I'm just going to pile it up. Then I can just keep rolling on my farm with harvest. I can get all the grain harvested, and then after harvest, I can get busy working on hauling that grain pile in. So I'm only going to pile it out there for maybe a few weeks at the most, and I'm going to pick it right back up and haul it in. Now, you can say, well, that seems like a lot of extra work, and it certainly is a lot of extra work cleaning that pile back up and hauling it all back in, but it could still save a farmer a considerable amount of time because he could get his harvest all done, and then instead of waiting in line at the elevator to dump, he can wait till everybody's done harvesting and there are no trucks hauling into the elevator. Well, then he can dump his grain, go grab another load, and run right back to the elevator again.
And the other thing is, on average, elevators will pay more once harvest is all done as opposed to what they actually pay during harvest. I guess one last thing I was going to mention here, rather than piling grain up, some farmers will use bags to temporarily store their grain. Rather than having the investment of putting up a new grain bin, they just use these bags as a temporary measure as opposed to having to bring that grain back to a grain site or to the grain elevator right away.
Well, it's certainly a common sight to see grain piled around the country, especially when yields are good. But to get those good yields, you have to control weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving and rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, Agro Liquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers.
Whether you're feeding cattle, milking cows, or baling hay, the work on your farm is never done, which is why you need equipment that works as hard as you do. Get the efficiency and versatility you need with Case IH. From FARMLOGIC compact and utility tractors to balers and mowers, all Case IH equipment is designed with one thing in mind: getting the job done. To learn more, visit caseih.com/livestock.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation, because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's ahead above the rest.
While we were off camera here, we were just talking a little bit about beans on beans, our next topic, and our producer said, well, you're standing in a cornfield and you're going to talk about beans on beans. That's right, because the last few years, farmers wanted to talk corn on corn. Running continuous corn seemed to be more profitable in a lot of situations, so there was a lot of corn planted. And honestly, for us on the farm, we wanted to try to build organic matter and do some other things. We got a lot of ethanol plants around here, so we thought, man, raising a lot of corn made a whole lot of sense. Well, now the soybean price looks really good, and we're getting really good soybean yields, even in very dry years. So a lot of people are going to the question, well, should I plant continuous soybeans?
Well, okay, let's just look at supply and demand. When corn price is really high, that means we need more corn. So farmers are really pushed to, well, hey, we need more corn, we better produce it. Now we got a high bean price and a low corn price, and a lot of farmers that could go either way are saying, well, man, maybe we really don't need so much corn, but we do need some beans, so I'm going to raise a little bit more. You just never know how these things are going to turn out. Maybe by next harvest, those things could be completely flipped around. So if you're looking at the soybean price today saying, wow, it's a great soybean price, lock some in. There's no guarantee that price is going to stay high, because soybeans are being raised around the world. Right now, there are crops growing in South America, for example, that are going to be harvested before we even plant our crop. So if they harvest a great crop, all of a sudden that soybean price may tank, and you may completely change your mind by next spring.
But here's the whole thing. I mean, we don't really care what happens to the markets when it comes to, let's just raise a great crop.
We want good prices.
Yeah, but don't get me wrong. I realize we've got to know what the marketing is. We have to do a good job with marketing. Yes, but we can't control that. But the other thing is, we don't want to focus on that right now. What we do want to focus on is, if you choose to raise continuous soybeans, what additional steps do you need to take to make that successful, as opposed to if you're in a corn-soybean rotation?
Well, first of all, you have to focus on fertility. Just like in continuous corn, we've got to really dial down that fertility need of the crop. Now, when we've got soybean ground from last year, it's a little different than if we were planting in this field, for example, where we had corn stalks. One thing would be nitrogen. Chances are, if we had a good corn crop this year, there's not going to be much nitrogen left. And if we're planting soybeans next year, we'll get a better response from a nitrogen application.
Well,
Typically,
we might.
25 or 50 pounds a lot of guys are adding, but it may even be 100 pounds depending on your soil type, what your soil can hold, and so forth. Coming off soybean ground, there may be some nitrogen left in that soil. So doing a good soil sample is a great place to start.
The main things, though, that you need to really look at on the fertility side when it comes to soybeans include phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. A lot of people have thought about sulfur as, well, that's really needed by grass crops. But you know what? You start raising 70, 80 bushel soybeans, which is certainly possible with the genetics we have today, and you're going to take a lot of sulfur out of the ground. I mean, it might be 15, 20, 25 pounds depending on your yield. That's quite a bit. And don't forget that just like nitrogen, sulfur is leachable. In other words, if you have decent rains this fall and next spring, you're not going to have a lot of sulfur left in your soil. You need to apply some sulfur. So that's why on our farm, every spring when we're going out applying our pre-emerge herbicides, what are we using for a carrier? It's not water. We're actually using some sulfur, nitrogen and sulfur typically, something like ammonium thiosulfate or Access combined with water. So we might have a little bit of water in there, a little bit of fertilizer, but the point is we're putting some sulfur out together with our herbicides since we're out there spraying anyway, and then it's right around planting time so we don't have as much risk for loss as if we were to apply that leachable sulfur in the fall.
Well, fertilizer is probably the biggest thing with crop production, and especially with soybeans. That's the #1 yield limiting factor for most farms across the country.
Yeah, but how many people actually apply P and K and sulfur to their soybeans?
Well, okay, I would say this. There are more people that are applying than are applying the right rates. And this is something where you need to know what your crop is going to remove from that ground. When we're thinking about raising 60, 70, 80 bushel soybeans, it's not like raising 30 bushel beans. We're taking a lot more nutrition out of the ground. That's where something like our Ag PhD fertilizer removal app comes in pretty handy. You can type in what your yield goals are or what you raised last year, and you can see what you pulled out of the ground last year. And you can just go back and figure, well, I added this much, but I took out this much. I really need to build things back up if I'm going to have a successful crop.
Now, when we start talking about all this, and you're a farmer and you look at this fertilizer removal app and you say, oh my goodness, soybeans actually do remove a lot of potassium, a fair amount of phosphorus, some sulfur, micronutrients, all these things. I might invest $150 an acre in fertilizer. That's right, you might. On our farm, we have a couple fields where we're going to put $200 worth of fertilizer out for soybeans. So one of your first thoughts may be, well, I can't afford to do that if I'm paying top dollar for cash rent. So if you are a landlord, I just want to speak to you directly about this. Think about who you're renting to and what kind of rental agreement you have. You are not going to be able to get top dollar for rent if that farmer is putting back the amount of fertilizer he's removing from your ground. So my suggestion to you is I would consider lowering what you're going to charge for rent as long as the farmer applies X number of pounds of fertilizer to make sure that your ground isn't falling behind long term. That's one of the main things we want you to think about. When you're raising beans on beans, you've got to fertilize. And also when you're doing your soil testing, take a real hard look at soil pH, because unless your soil pH is in the range of 6.3 to 7.3, you're going to have a tougher time of raising good soybeans. For example, if you got a pH of 8 out there, that tells us you probably have a drainage issue. You may possibly just have an issue where you've had lots of soil erosion over the years. Either way, we want you to certainly consider putting some tile in the ground and take a look at trying to build topsoil going forward. That means reducing tillage, using manure when you can, using some biological products. And yes, soybeans don't have as many roots as what corn does. They're not going to have as much residue. They're not going to have as much organic material or overall trash on top of the ground, some people will call it. But so what? If you reduce the tillage, you can still do a good job maintaining and even building your organic matter over time.
Then the next thing to me is seed selection. When we're talking about continuous soybeans, we've got to look at two things. One, nematode protection. And number two, we're going to have to look at disease tolerance of those varieties. We see wide differences from one variety to the next. Plant the defensive beans in continuous soybeans. You're going to have more disease issues, whether it's brown stem rot or a number of other diseases that you could have.
Yep. The other thing is you've got to manage this going into next year with fungicide if you are starting to run into certain diseases like white mold, for example. That one you absolutely can control as long as you stay ahead of it. Same thing with soybean rust and some of these other diseases that are obviously going to be present in soybeans, not in corn. just make sure you're spraying your fungicide before you actually have a complete disaster on your hands. Once you've seen disease all over your plants, you might be able to stop it from that point, but you've already lost so much of your yield. And don't forget about having a good seed treatment in the soil. That's going to help you with that disease too. You don't break the cycle for diseases and insects, so you're much more likely to have disease and insect problems. That's why a good seed treatment and monitoring your fields throughout the season become more important.
And of course, weed control is going to be real critical, especially as we have more Roundup resistant weeds out there. We've definitely got to start with a good pre-emerge program like our 3 pre-emerge herbicide strategy that we're talking about all the time. We're using 3 different sites of action at the pre-emerge timing to stop those weeds before they even come up.
Well, once again, you absolutely can be successful raising continuous soybeans on your farm. We've done it on some of our fields over the years, and you may consider it depending on how prices look next spring. Well, hopefully our Weed of the Week isn't going to be a problem, but if it is, we'll tell you how to stop it coming up later in the show.
Upgrade your trailer to electric with the Rolltech electric system from AgriCover. Strong, flexible pivot arms and motor mount rotate and telescope, allowing the roll tube to rise and flex over heaped loads. The positive automatic lock is impossible to back off to control the flow of grain. This integrated system uses one wireless remote to operate up to 10 tarps and hoppers, keeping your driver out of the dust, rain, and harm's way. See the Rolltech system in action at an AgriCover dealer near you.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
For years, FARMLOGIC has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's a head above the rest.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
We've talked a lot about micronutrients over the years here on Ag PhD. Today we want to really simplify this for you and talk to you about 4 key things. Number 1, how important micronutrients are. Even though you don't need many, they are very important to raising a good crop. 2, we want you to test your soil for micronutrients. 3, test your plant tissue, test your crop basically for micronutrients next season. And 4, consider using blended products rather than either trying to blend your own or just throwing one micronutrient out there and forgetting about the rest.
Well, micronutrients are certainly important. When we look at our crops, whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever, we seem to almost always get a positive economic return putting micronutrients on that crop. Now, one of the things that we did a few years back, we did plant tissue analysis across 650 different farms, and in almost 100% of the cases, we found 1 or more micronutrients to be low to deficient. Everybody's got this issue. It's not just, oh, that's an issue in South Dakota where we farm, or oh, that's an issue in Iowa. It's an issue everywhere with every crop. Just like we have to put on N, P, and K all the time for about every crop we're raising, we also need a low level of micronutrients to go out there as well. If we're loading up our soils with N, P, and K, that's wonderful, but we have to keep things in balance. Otherwise, our yield limiting factor is going to be one of the most essential nutrients that we're short of. In many cases, it could be a micro.
And we have all different reasons for why micronutrients might be short. Number one, you're using some up. Yeah, I know you're not using a lot, but you're using some. Two, you could have micronutrients tied up in your soil. So they're sitting there, but they're bound up with things like calcium or aluminum or iron. They're just not going to be available. Also, in terms of these micronutrients, some are leachable, like boron, for example. So if you get a lot of rain, that can flush down. Others are almost immobile in soil, like zinc. So if you have an eroded side hill, guess what? Your zinc just went down the hill with the soil when the soil erosion occurred. So it could be any number of these different things. That's why we want you to test your soil and especially do some grid sampling or zone sampling. Don't do composite sampling. That doesn't really help you a whole lot. And then also do some plant tissue analysis. Like Darren said, you know, when we did this big study a few years ago on 650 different farms, it was very eye-opening to all these farmers that participated, just very revealing how important micronutrients are. Because for many of these farmers, they were in good shape on N, P, and K. Everything else looked good. You know what their yield limiting factor was? It was a micronutrient that literally cost $1 or $2 to put out there. That's it. And they'd invested hundreds of dollars in everything else they'd done, and something that was just $1 or $2 was what was holding them up.
Well, the other thing is it really confuses farmers when they look at a soil test and they say, well, it looks like I have enough zinc out there. It says I'm in the medium to high category. But then when we pull plant tissue analysis, we can see, well, wait a minute, something's tying up that zinc or inhibiting the uptake because our plants are drastically short in zinc and we're getting a good yield response putting more on.
Well, that's the reason why we commonly have farmers applying blended micronutrients. That's what we found on our farm, blended for the crop that you're raising. In other words, corn needs a little different ratio of micronutrients as opposed to soybeans, as opposed to wheat. So get a blended product that's right for your farm, for the crop that you're raising, and then that will get you a long ways down the path that you need to go.
Well, one of the big problems too is you only need just a small amount of each one of these micros. It's very difficult to apply 1/10 of a pound of boron across an acre. How do you get that spread just right? And if you say, well, I'll just put a pound out and I'm good for 10 years, then all of a sudden you have tie-up of other nutrients because you have such an excess of boron. So you have to be real cautious about whatever nutrient you're putting out there, that you use these blended micro products so you get the right ratio so you don't have any big tie-up issues.
Well, micronutrients could be a yield limiting factor on your farm, but so could weeds. Hopefully it's not our weed of the week though. Can you identify this week's weed?
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is Blackseed Plantain.
You know, this is one I see all the time, but where I see it is in lawns and overgrazed pastures.
Well, the other area that we see this is in poorly drained areas. If you fix the drainage issue, you get some tile out there, do whatever you need to fix the drainage issue, this often isn't that big a problem. And whether it's the crop or the lawn or the pasture, it basically just comes down to crop canopy. In other words, the better crop canopy you have, the less problem we have with Blackseed Plantain. So let your grass grow a little bit taller. Don't overgraze. Don't cut the lawn so short. Get your drainage fixed so the crop you're raising can do much better, and Blackseed Plantain won't be a big problem on your farm.
Well, one of the issues though, let's just say it's in your lawn, is once this weed gets started, it is a perennial weed. It's not going away until you do something to kill that weed.
Hit it with a high rate of 2,4-D.
And what it'll do is it'll spread out on the ground and then it'll kind of choke out the grass around it and try and protect itself. So get out there in the fall or the early spring with a very strong rate of 2,4-D. You can do a nice job knocking out Blackseed Plantain. It may take a second application later on to completely wipe it out, but if it's just getting established in your lawn, you should be able to knock it out with one shot.
In corn, soybeans, or wheat pre-emerge, we like Sharpen. Where you can use Roundup, that's great because Roundup does do a nice job as long as you're using a high rate. Post-emerge in corn, Status would probably be the best. In soybeans, we don't have a lot of great options. Cobra or Flexstar might burn it, but otherwise Roundup is the way to go. And in wheat, I'd probably say Husky. What do you think?
I'd use a high rate of Husky, and it's one of those weeds, if it did happen to get really bad across the field, you can wipe it out with your Roundup burn down and take care of it.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
Down corn is tough to combine, but what do you do after harvest to clean things up? I'll discuss it in today's Iron Talk. It's bad enough that some of your corn went down. You lost yield, maybe a lot. You had to take quite a bit of time to get it out of the field too, and you may have even had to buy or borrow some extra equipment. Harvest is done now, but your nightmare may not be over. Now you've got to prep that field for the next crop. Here are a few observations from downed corn this fall. Long stalks laying every which way are a challenge for many types of operations. In our strip till, for example, we even had a little challenge in fields where the tops fell off of the corn, dealing with those longer pieces compared to where our chopping head had everything sized up to just a few inches long. Coulter carts of various kinds, or vertical tillage, will do a nice job sizing up that residue so it flows through your next machine much better, whether it's a 330 turbo case machine or the individual coulters of a SULFUR. In my opinion, it's a valuable pass through the field. Then you can follow up with strip till, no-till, or conventional tillage depending on your situation. If stock rot was the culprit, rotating away from corn next year is a good strategy. We saw stock rots especially bad in areas that had excessive spring moisture, insufficient drainage tile, and corn rootworm feeding. In some cases, the planting population was too high for the fertility levels in the field. Make adjustments to your fertility program and planting populations going into next year to avoid a similar fate. Downed corn is bad. If there's still time to clean things up this fall, vertical tillage is often a big help. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
At Titan Machinery and Case IH, we offer better solutions for all your production needs. It's more than our job, it's who we are. We are parts. We are service. We are training. And most importantly, we are here for you. In any season, for every reason, we've got you covered. Case IH and Titan Machinery, better solutions.
For years, FARMLOGIC has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Weed of the Week, Iron Talk, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Plants actually tell farmers what nutrients they need. They don't do it verbally, but farmers get the information through plant tissue analysis. It's another way farmers practice responsible nutrient management. To learn more, visit rnmf.org.